Jesus is acceptable in many religions so long as he isn't considered to be God, because Jesus is where the rubber really meets the road. You know that, right? I heard a sermon this week by a pastor who was talking about the incarnation. He said people are really friendly towards the idea until you start assigning proper titles to the child that was born. It's a lovely story. Oh, Jesus, this baby. We sing a song called Silent Night, and we have this image of Mary who delivered this child with no pain, and this baby that's just lying there wrapped tightly in his swaddle, and everything's great. And it was a silent night. We know that probably wasn't true. But when you say, but that is God in flesh, that's where it gets dicey for people. It's interesting that Scripture teaches that God was with us, because we see this play out all throughout the Scriptures, in the Old Testament as well. Jesus came to be with us as the final revelator, but before that, God was with us in other fashion. Just real quickly, it says in the Scripture, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. Right? God with us. And the idea here is that God being with us means that he tabernacles with us. And the tabernacle in the Old Testament plays an important role in the presence of God. The tabernacle was temporary. It was a precursor to the temple. The tabernacle existed as a mobile temple. God, the Word, was with us temporarily. Oh, this is God with us, foreshadowing Jesus. The tabernacle was used for wilderness dwelling. The temple came once the Israelites reached the promised land. The wilderness home of the tabernacle foreshadowed the manger, cradle, carpenter's bench, the nowhere for the Son of Man to lay his head. And I could go on, but for time's sake, I will not. But know that the tabernacle plays an important role in the idea that God is with us. So here's where I kind of want to bring this. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us so that he might suffer as our substitute. And that's why Jesus came. Chuck Lawson said Jesus didn't come to create a holiday. He came to die for sinners. And you don't think about the incarnation without thinking about what it led to. Because lots of babies are born every day. Lots of babies are born in inhospitable condition and context. Lots of men died on a cross, but only one was resurrected. And only one died as one who was sufficient enough to absorb the almighty wrath of God. So the incarnation takes us directly to the gospel, because there's nowhere else for us to go with that. So here's the question now. What is the appropriate response to the incarnation of Christ? This is a lot of heady, lofty stuff. I know. I read all kinds of stuff this week, trying to find something new, something fresh. Maybe something to dazzle you with a little bit, but it's all been said. It's all been said. And here's something very simplistic, but something very applicable. What is the appropriate response to the incarnation of Christ? One is your humility. Is your humility. Because when you compare yourself, you are the scale. You become the scale that when you're postured next to Christ, that you fade in the shadow. Because there's nothing that compares to him. What he's worth and what he's done, what he's secured. And the second response is worship. And the two necessarily go together. Because worship cannot exist where humility is not expressed. Worship cannot exist where humility is not expressed. If you say, I've worshiped today, but there was no humility to make note of, then it wasn't worship. Because worship comes from a place of humility when you recognize your place before the divine. You recognize the work of the divine that was applied to you actively and your role in that passively. And what that invokes from us is worship. So here's what we're going to do. It's going to sound bad on my part. But I'm going to lead us in a couple of a cappella songs. And that's how we're going to close out. We're just going to sing probably 2. I had 3 ready, but my voice just won't do it. We're going to sing 3. We're going to sing 2, if I can get through those. But I'm going to really rely on you to sing. One of them you'll know really well. One of them you might not know as well. So let's stand together. And we can have the words up here on the screen. And that's how we're going to close out, is